Snow drifted like ash over the high plains, and Elias McGraw sat in the back of a rattling wagon, coat collar high, watching the black railroad smoke curl into the gray sky. Somewhere in that train was the woman he'd paid for, the one who was meant to give him a son, the one who, in his mind, would sit at his long oak table, bear the McGraw name, and keep the hearth warm when the north wind came down hard from the mountains. He'd imagined a quiet, capable wife. He had not imagined her bringing more than herself. The train's brakes screamed and hissed, iron wheels grinding against frozen rails. Elias stepped down from the wagon, boots crunching over hard-packed snow. His breath hung in the air, slow and heavy, like the weight in his chest. The platform was busy with folks collecting freight and kin. He scanned faces until he saw her. She was smaller than he'd pictured from the photograph, shoulders drawn tight under a worn gray coat, the fabric thin enough that he could see the bones at her wrists. Her eyes were steady, though, the kind that met trouble without flinching. But what caught him were the shadows trailing behind her. 5 boys, each dressed in patched coats and boots that had seen better years. The oldest, already tall enough to look him in the eye, had a jaw set like a man twice his age. The youngest clung to her skirt, eyes wide and unblinking. Elias's face didn't change, though his gut tightened. The letter from the agency hadn't said a thing about children. 5 of them. He thought of the quiet halls of his ranch house, of the tidy order he kept, of the single place at the table he'd set aside for her. "Mr. McGraw?" she asked, her voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. He nodded once. "Mrs. Hayes." The words felt stiff. "My husband died in the Red Rock mine 3 winters ago," she said, her chin lifting a fraction. "These are my boys. They work hard. They don't cause trouble." Her eyes searched his, but he gave nothing away. The banker, Harlan Tate, leaned against a post a few yards away, his mouth twisted in a smirk, like he was already tasting the story he'd tell in town. Elias took the handle of her carpet bag without asking, turned toward the wagon. The boys followed, boots scuffing the boards of the platform. The oldest kept between Elias and his mother, as if guarding her. The road back to the ranch was a ribbon of ruts through white fields. The wind pushed against them, the sky a low ceiling. Elias kept the reins steady, his gaze forward. The boys sat stiff in the back, their eyes on the horizon, except the little one, who leaned into his mother's side. She hummed to him, a sound so soft Elias almost missed it beneath the squeak of the harness leather. They passed through a stand of bare cottonwoods, the branches clicking like bones. Ahead, the McGraw ranch rose from the snow, a big 2-story house of dark timber, the barn set in neat lines behind it. It looked solid, unbending, built out last storms. Mrs. Boone, the widow who kept to the neighboring property, stepped out of her sleigh in the yard, holding a loaf of bread wrapped in a towel. Her sharp eyes swept over the newcomers. "Quite a haul you brought home, Elias," she said, voice just loud enough to carry. Maribel Hayes's shoulders drew back, her hands tightening on the little one's shoulders. The boys hovered close to her skirts, eyes flicking between the stranger and Elias. Inside, the air was warm from the bank fire, smelling faintly of pine pitch. Elias showed her the guest room, a space he'd meant for her alone. She guided the boys inside without hesitation, setting them to work. Boots off, coats hung, small hands washed. That night, he stood in the doorway as she bent over the bed, tucking in blankets, her hair falling loose over her shoulder. The boys lay still, the oldest staring at the ceiling, the youngest already breathing deep. The house no longer felt empty. It felt heavier, filled with cautious breathing, with something fragile that might break if touched too soon. "I came for one," he thought, but 5 pairs of eyes now weighed on me like the winter sky. "Do you want me to continue with Section 2 in the same cinematic tone?" A thin dawn spread over the prairie, the kind that turned the snow to silver and made the world feel as though it were holding its breath. Inside the McGraw ranch house, the smell of coffee and biscuits drifted through the kitchen. Maribel stood at the counter in her faded dress, sleeves rolled to the elbow, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 mornings. Elias, fastening the buttons of his vest, caught himself watching her hands. They moved quick and sure, not for him, he knew, but for survival. The boys had taken to rising early. The oldest, Silas, carried in wood from the shed without being told. Jonah hauled water from the pump. Levi, the hot-blooded one, would grumble but still fill the coal scuttle. Micah was always the last of the table, hair sticking up like wheat in a crosswind. The little one, Thomas, stayed pressed close to his mother, as if the floorboards themselves might try to take him. Elias kept to himself, speaking little. The boys answered in nods or short words, their eyes measuring him as if he were a stranger in their own camp. And maybe he was. Once a week, they drove to town. The wind there carried more than cold. It carried whispers. Elias heard them as they passed the mercantile, Mrs. Boone at his side, pretending not to notice. Bought himself a bride and got the whole brood with her, someone murmured. The banker, Harlan Tate, made no effort to keep his voice low when he said, "A man's only so desperate when he's got no kin left to call his own." Elias's jaw tightened, but he let it pass. His silence, he realized later, felt like distance to Maribel. Still, the days turned their slow circle. One bitter evening, Elias came in from the barn to find Silas's bed near the window, the boy shivering under two thin blankets. Without a word, Elias fetched another from the linen chest and laid it over him. Silas opened his eyes, ready to protest. But Elias was already walking out. A week later, Elias found one of his work shirts neatly folded on the table, a tear in the sleeve mended with small, even stitches. He looked toward the kitchen, where Maribel was bent over the stove, her back to him. He didn't say thank you, didn't know how to say it without giving away how much it mattered. Micah, the quiet one, brought him a gift not long after, a carved horse whittled from scrap pine. "For you," he said, not meeting Elias's eyes. The wood was rough, but the shape was there, a proud neck for sturdy legs. Elias took it, nodded once, and set it on the mantel. Not all moments were gentle. Levi got into a fight with a miller boy behind the blacksmith shop after the boy called Maribel bought. Elias heard about it before they had even left town. He found Levi with a split lip and fist still clenched, ready for trouble. Instead of scolding him in front of the onlookers, Elias simply put a hand on the boy's shoulder and steered him toward the wagon. The boy didn't shrug him off. Maribel saw it, and something in her gaze toward Elias shifted just slightly. One night, the snow came heavy and hard, a blizzard that erased the horizon. They gathered near the hearth, the wind howling against the shutters. Elias, half out of habit, began telling a story from his cattle-driving days, about a horse that had more sense than the men riding it. His voice was low, rough from disuse. One by one, the boys leaned closer. Even Silas, sitting cross-legged on the floor, let his scowl fade as the tale wound on. Maribel didn't speak, just watched from her chair, the firelight painting her face in soft gold. When the wind eased and the story ended, Elias leaned back in his seat, surprised at how the air in the room had changed. The silence between them wasn't the same as before. It was fuller, warmer, as though some invisible bridge had been built in the telling. The distance between us was still wide, he thought. But now and then, a plank of trust laid itself across, quiet as snowfall. Do you want me to carry this directly into Section 3, so the emotional momentum isn't lost? Spring wind rolled across the plains, warm enough to carry the smell of thawing earth. But under it came dust that meant someone was coming. From the porch, Elias could see the buggy cutting across the flats. Two men inside. He knew one by the set of his shoulders, Harlan Tate. The other wore the star of a deputy. Trouble, neat and legal, heading straight from McGraw Ranch. Maribel stepped out of the barn with a basket of washing, her skirt catching the wind. She saw the buggy, and the color drained from her face. The boys emerged one by one from their chores, drawn by the sound of wheels over gravel. Silas moved first, instinctively placing himself between his mother and the approaching men. The buggy stopped in the yard. Tate climbed down, papers in hand, a smugness about him that made Elias's jaw tighten. "McGraw," he said, his tone oily, "seems there's been some oversight. These boys—" He nodded toward the five-liner behind Maribel. "They got a blood uncle down in Santa Fe. Got papers here say he's claiming custody." plans to put M to work in his freight outfit. Court will side with Kin every time. Maribel's fingers gripped the laundry basket until her knuckles went white. That man's never lifted a finger for them, she said, her voice tight. Tate shrugged, pretending sympathy. Blood's blood, Mrs. Hayes. And you, McGraw, well, you got no rightful claim. His eyes gleamed. You wanted an heir. All you bought yourself was a problem. Elias stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Blood, don't make a man kin, he said, his voice steady as a fence post in hard ground. Staying does. The deputy shifted uncomfortably, but Tate pressed on. This can be easy or hard. Hand him over, and we're gone before supper. Elias moved between the boys and the men, his coat flaring in the wind. His hand rested on the rifle leaning against the porch, not threatening, just there like it belonged. Silas took a breath and, for the first time, stepped to Elias's side instead of in front of his brothers. The message was clear without a word. You'll have to take them over me, Elias said, his eyes locked on Tate. And that's a piece of land you don't want to cross. For a long moment, only the wind spoke, lifting dust around their boots. The deputy looked at Tate, shook his head slightly. Tate's mouth twisted, but he climbed back into the buggy. This ain't over, he muttered. The buggy turned, wheels spitting grit, and rolled back toward the horizon. The yard was still again. The boys stood in a tight knot, their faces pale but unbroken. Elias turned, kneeling so he could look Thomas in the eye. You're mine, he said softly, if you'll have me. That night, after the lamps were turned low, Silas lingered in the doorway to the front room. Elias was reading by the fire when he heard it. Quiet as a settling house, Silas's voice saying just one word, Pa! Then the boy disappeared down the hall. Across the room, Maribel met his gaze. She didn't speak, but the look she gave him was steadier than any vow. I came looking for a name to carry mine, Elias thought, but the Lord in his sideways mercy gave me more, a house that breathes, laughter under the eaves, and 5 boys who taught me that blood is just water until you choose to make it run warm.